I'm Heath Lambert. You're listening to Marked by Grace, a podcast applying the grace of Jesus to all of life. Was the American Revolution sinful? That's the question we're taking this week on Marked by Grace. I want to welcome you to this June 30th edition of Marked by Grace. It is the week of the 4th of July that's going to come here in just a few days, and that's why we're taking this very, very relevant question. Maybe you've got a different question, a different concern, a different ethical dilemma you'd like me to address. If you do, you can send that in to markedbygrace@fbcjacks.com. That's markedbygrace@fbcjacks with an X.com. I'd love to get your question and try to answer it. This week, we have a great question for the 4th of July. As we celebrate American independence this week, you sent in a very relevant question about American independence. And here is the question from you as I received it. Were the founding fathers wrong or sinful to rebel against England? Were the founding fathers wrong or sinful to rebel against England? I love the question. It's the intersection of two things that I love. So I love Christian theology. I've spent my adult life studying it, reading it, teaching it, thinking about it. I love Christian theology, and I also love the American founding. I love the American Revolutionary era. I have read maybe as much about that as anything except Christian theology. World War II might give it a run for its money, but I love the American founding. I love reading about the founding fathers. And so this is actually a very relevant question that marries Christian theology and the American founding. Were the founding fathers sinful when they rebelled against England? The question is actually just a little bit more complicated than you might anticipate. And the reason is that belief, conviction that the American colonies must become independent from England, that belief was very widespread. Of course, it was not uncontroversial. In the 1700s, there were patriots, as they were called, members of the colonies that wanted to rebel, and there were loyalists, members of the colonies that wanted to remain allied to the crown. But the patriots were very, very widespread. It was actually obviously the dominant view, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. And it wasn't just the so-called founding fathers, it was preachers. You read about the history of the American founding, and it was common for preachers in the colonies to preach against the sins and the crimes of England, to talk about the importance and the virtues of freedom and independence. Just one example of this that kind of lets you know how complicated things were has to do with the very famous Old North Church. You remember from the story of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, that he was going to announce that the British were coming, and he was going to send a signal that the British were coming by land or by sea with lamps. One lamp indicated that the British were coming by land. 2 lamps burning indicated that the British were coming by sea. And where were those lamps going to be posted? They were going to be posted in the tower of the Old North Church. That means the leadership of a local church in Boston didn't just agree with the desire of the American colonies to separate from England. They were part of the announcement that the fighting needed to begin. They became complicit in the rebellion. The conviction was such that churches were a part of the effort to break away from England. And so I say this is more complicated only because it was so clear to so many in the American founding that this rebellion needed to take place, that it's worth considering. In retrospect, were they right or were they wrong? Well, I think we need to first say, by way of a biblical answer to that, that the New Testament is not written to spur revolution. It is written to spur the Great Commission. And so anyone looking to read the New Testament to find a manifesto for political independence is going to be disappointed. And anybody who tries to tell you that that's what the New Testament is misunderstanding and misrepresenting the nature of the Bible. And so it is true that the Bible doesn't give us guidance, primary guidance about how to break away from an unjust authority, because the Bible is emphasizing the spread of the gospel. And so that's why the Bible so often is going to say that we do need to submit to our leaders. We do need to submit to the king or to the emperor, to those who rule over us. But even though that's the case, I do believe we can make an argument that the founding fathers were justified in breaking away from King George, breaking away from England. And I think they were justified on a couple of different grounds. The most important are biblical grounds. In Romans chapter 13, starting in verse 1, the Bible says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities." So there's the thing that makes us ask, was it wrong to do this? Aren't we supposed to be subject to King George? Aren't we supposed to be subject to the crown? The answer to that question is yes. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. So one of the reasons that we are subject to the governing authorities is because of the sovereignty of God. There's no person in authority, there is no person in power that hasn't been placed into that position by God himself. Verse 2, "Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." So penalties incur for those who do not submit to the governing authorities. Verse 3, "Rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who's in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good." Okay, so here is where we have teaching in the Bible, teaching in the New Testament here that yes, we are supposed to submit to the governing authorities. Why would we submit to the governing authorities? Because government is good, structure is good, civil order is good. The gospel of Jesus Christ is going to flow more easily when there is a government that is obeyed, more than it's going to flow when there is anarchy. And so government is good. But listen to the qualifications in the passage. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. The function of government as it is instituted by God is to honor, reward, and protect good conduct and to punish bad conduct. That means this thing gets off the rails when we start to have rulers, when we start to have leaders that are rewarding and advancing and protecting bad conduct and punishing good conduct. It goes on to say in verse 4, "He is God's servant for your good." So what the function of government is to advance the cause of good. And once we have a government that is no longer interested in advancing the good, that is no longer interested in protecting against the bad, now we have an unusual situation that must be reconsidered. It's not the ultimate concern that it be reconsidered. The ultimate concern is that the gospel be advanced even to our own hurt. But it doesn't mean that commitment to the gospel that it's always wrong to consider how government might be improved. And so it was true that the founding fathers had biblical authority to say, hey, you know what, we do need to submit to the government. But if the government is a terror to good conduct, if the government is not God's servant for good, but if they're a servant for ill, for evil, then we have a right to start thinking about how to improve this situation. So I think the founding fathers had justification on biblical grounds, that they were looking at the crown, they were looking at the decisions that were coming over from England, and they were saying, this is not right, and this needs to be fixed. On practical grounds, they were also justified. If you read about the history of the American founding, Long before declarations of independence and long before shots heard around the world and long before Boston Tea Parties, there were efforts made on the part of the colonies to appeal to the crown, to appeal to Parliament, to give them relief, to not do these things that they were doing. And all of those efforts were thwarted. And in fact, the King of England decided just to keep pressing and pressing harder and harder against what were reasonable concerns on the part of the Founding Fathers. Another practical ground that I think justified the efforts of the Founding Fathers to rebel is that they did not seek anarchy. They did not seek to replace a bad government with no government. They sought to replace a bad government with a better government. And that is all the difference in the world when it comes to fighting against an authority as they were in the 1700s. You put all this together, and I think what we put the Bible teaching together with the practical situation on the ground in the colonies in the 1700s, and I think we have to say that revolution should never and will never be the main occupation of Christians, but revolution of a bad authority to replace it with a better authority is not forbidden Christians. To say it a different way, Christians don't have to be the only ones not thinking about how to improve the situation of the government where they live. I think the Christians that were thinking hard, that were thinking biblically, that were thinking faithfully, that were even using their churches to figure out how to thwart bad government and replace it with a better government, I think they were more than justified.